Welcome to the Cyber Lunchbox podcast. Welcome to the Cyber Lunchbox podcast. I'm your host, Silvia Ceaușu. Today I'm speaking with Pep Serra-Diaz, assistant professor at AgroParisTech in France, and a researcher in plant ecology and global change. Welcome, Pep.
Thank you.
So first, tell us a bit about your current research and your current research interests and what you're working at AgroParisTech.
So right now I'm working on how climate change and global change more generally. So basically how climate and humans might affect forests particularly, but woodlands in general. And the way we do that, it's trying to mix experiments, so field experiments, modeling at large scale, simulation modeling, and as well as correlative or statistical models. We're trying to understand is a little bit like how this whole labyrinth of the factors and drivers, like fire, like wind, like all these disturbances, also including humans, might affect our woodlands in terms of their diversity, their composition, their structure. How all these landscapes are going to change? We focus basically in temperate and Mediterranean systems, especially, but I'll be happy to work hopefully soon in more tropical dry forests in general.
So you're working both at large scale, but also locally.
Yeah,
Do you do field work?
Yeah, so from landscapes to basically our work is from landscapes to global scale.
What sent you down this path of research? Is this what you have been doing since your PhD?
I've always been working with models and vegetation and woodlands, but of course, I was lucky enough to go through this path through different experiences during my PhD, but before that too, and also during different postdocs at different institutions. So basically, I got super interested in that through, of course, maybe like most or a lot of us, like you had like a really nice professor who's engaging. That was at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, and I had like a landscape geobotany professor who liked to just put pictures there and try to explain what do you see there, why is this species there, why do you think this forest is here, why are those fields or agricultural fields here. And through interpreting the landscape I realized like almost like like when you do urban planning and everything, there's a history behind why the things are that way. And also he was also linking that to the big mess of climate change and how although our landscapes might change. And so that's what started somehow that triggered this part to try to learn more about that and try to be aware of what's happening in our mountains, in our landscapes. So that's how it all started. Then I just went through a period in which I was doing I finished my bachelor's, and then I said like, well, I did some research job like as a research assistant for several labs in geography. But then I said like, hey, I'm fed up of universities. This is like, too much talking and not much doing. And so I did go to work at the private sector and at environmental engineering company. I was a consultant together with architects, urbanists, and as well as people working, forest engineers. And I was working at this engineering company just providing like environmental impact assessments. And that was really cool. I mean, I felt like, I was doing things like projects that started and ended and things that I was working to try to change some of the projects so that they were like, there was less impact and trying to enhance biodiversity in some of like, urbanization processes. That was really cool for a while. But then after some time, I got a little bit bored because it looked like things had a very limited time. So, while that was very rewarding, after some time, I felt like, well, we're not really we're doing this, we know that this project needs to end after 6 months, but there's so many questions to be answered yet, and I'm not sure this is as good as it could get, right? So that's what triggered me to go into the path of a PhD. And then just I did my PhD in Barcelona, and then on distribution of species and how that might change with climate change. I had the opportunity to visit several labs in Copenhagen, in Portugal, also in the United States, where I got my first postdoc. And the cool thing, I think, it was like through the different postdocs, which is the best part of your research career, I have to say, at least for me. That was how I kind of spanned the breadth of things and issues that I study. So one postdoc on microclimates and forests and how how climates are like really, they vary at very short time spans and short also distances, and how that affects like biodiversity protection and the dynamics in woodlands. Then another one on landscape ecology at Harvard University, which was more about like how forest and woodlands might change through with different simulation models, and it got really geeky, and that was really interesting. And then in Aarhus, at Aarhus University as a postdoc, trying to study biodiversity, but at huge scale, global scales with big data and stuff like that. So, first postdoc was more on experiments and things like that. Last postdoc was totally on modeling. The middle of the postdoc was halfway. And so I tried to integrate all that thing. So all those things. I don't know. That's how I got like through this career. It was really, I mean, I was lucky, I guess.
You talked a bit about the impact working in the private sector. Do you feel you have an impact as well as a researcher?
I do. It just I think it takes longer to see that impact. It's just the time scale is very different. And while I don't know, at some point in my life, I needed to have something more tangible, something that there's a product here that I see. I know after 6 months or 4 months, sometimes 15 days, you need to have something out there. Right now, I feel like the impact, it's a little bit like it's more longer term. Also, I think it has an impact when I shifted a little bit from starting to shift a little bit from going from more like a papers perspective or project perspective to also try to engage with people in the field. This is something that we do also in our teaching, but also something that we do also with forest managers and people who are now, especially right now, where for us who work on climate change, people are starting to ask questions finally, like, well, okay, I have this piece of land, how the hell am I going to do this? And so, and that's where you're starting to confront to give answers, not for the 21st, 2100, but actually for right now. And the end of the day, it's like, well, what do I do with these trees? And what do I do with these trees right now? And that's where you start to realize that as a scientist, you don't have, of course, all the answers, but you need to work across different people with different perspectives. And so trying to combine both, it's the way I do it. But as a scientist, I see that the impact of what we do, it's a longer term. So you have to be more patient sometimes.
What are the climate change impacts on forestry in France, in the areas where you're working? Do you expect a change in species, or do you expect a change in climate conditions?
Well, there's several different things that a lot of these things we don't know. I mean, I think in general, that could apply to a lot of other forests, but it depends where you are in France. The forest is very protective, so there's like a production issue there. Like, wood needs to come from somewhere, and you either import it from the tropics or you try to have it, your own, which is what they're trying to do. But at the same time, you know, that's a problem for conservation, depending on what rate you do it and where do you put that. So where do we put the effort for extraction of the resource versus where do the land sparing, land sharing thing that, we've been through that for many years. But so basically, like, the questions regarding climate change is a little bit like, in terms of forest, is like, what is the rate and what kind of management we're trying to pursue here. Like there's these things like, at what rate should we be extracting and identifying target trees? So how do you how do you cut them so that there's less of an impact? Big questions on how and under which conditions forests will be able to self-sustain or and regenerate, or you might need some help. Whether the species that have been planted actually in the past are actually a good idea. We see they're not anymore. So basically, there's this question of changing species versus changing the sources of the species. So one of the things the big question is like whether you want to change to a different kind of system with new species, or whether you want to give it a shot at trying to get to different provenance of the same species, because different populations of the same species might be adapted differently. Of course, when you talk about trees, we're talking about, these are like organisms that's, even when it's going to take 40 to 50 years till you eventually get some, you extract them. So that is something that you don't want to get it wrong, right? Because it takes a while. Um, there's other questions regarding like under which management conditions we are more resilient to actually to forest disturbances, including like fires or wind. It's also like a question of not individual landowners, but also like community, in terms of like it doesn't really matter. This is something that we try to talk about a little bit. It doesn't really matter what you do individually, if your neighbor goes a different strategy, and under which conditions a diversity of strategies enhances the resilience of the whole system. Sometimes it's not a matter of everyone doing the same thing. Might be, at a larger scale, kind of risky if we get it wrong. So these are like key questions. Also in the changing of species, I think sometimes we forget that changing species in a resource system, it takes a little bit of energy. I think that for some of us, like, well, you change species to adapt to climate change, but for instance, sometimes changing to a different species, the silviculture, which has a lot of cultural implications of that species, it's not present in that country. So you might change to a different species, but we don't really know whether wood is actually, we could use them if we have the infrastructure to actually use the wood that we could extract from that species. It's kind of complicated, and sometimes that it's, well, you'll see it has a lot of ramifications.
I know that a large part of your job is also teaching. So can you tell us a bit about how your work looks like? How much of it is teaching? How much of it is research?
That's a hard question. I don't know how to count teaching. If I were, so just to put it this way, like there's out of the year, there's 3 months in which teaching is the main thing, and especially where I am, because so there's one thing that I'm really happy and proud to be working at this institution is that we do a lot of translational ecology. So there's a part of teaching which would be like a course with their labs, computer labs or field lab, but there's another course that I'm teaching that it's based on basically project-based learning, and it's a translational project. So basically what we do with students, it's like we create like a small company or a little corporation if we want it. And every year we work with a regional park or a natural park. We develop like the target and the goals. And then what we do, it's like they establish like the calendar. They establish like a system of how we're going to communicate. They organize the whole project. We go to the field in that place, we take measurements for 15 days, and then they write a report. But basically it's a management report where these are the kind of actions with prioritization. So it's a project that from A to Z, and we present that project to the municipalities, to the natural park managers. And so far it's super rewarding for them and for me, because you see things that they've been applied, right? So for instance, just to give you a little bit of an example, like last year we went to this small protected site. It was a Natura 2000 site where they had several issues regarding like how do we conserve forests here when we have a lot of prairies, and we see that there's like wood encroachment, but we still don't want to get the forests out of there because then we're going to have landslides, and there's also climate change, and there's also fire. So what they did is like they created like they have a logo, so they create like a little company for the whole year with a logo and an email, really professional. We went there, we took some measurements of the wood encroachment, we did a diagnosis of which sites and under which conditions of wood encroachment would make sense, and what would be the potential actions regarding, like, introduction of sheep, introduction of well, different cattle in general. So they did like they work with people, so they did interviews, they work with data, ecological data, they work with models, they did also some climate change models. We have 30 people working, even if it's for a month on a project. There's and
30
that's
students.
30 students working. Yeah, I like to call them like also people, because at that point I feel like they're almost professionals, right? So
Mhm.
I'm coordinating that a little bit, but it's really their job, and I'm there just to enhance the learning process.
So you're doing less actual teaching in class, and a lot of it is project based.
So half of it it's project based, and half of it is more like teaching in class, and then computers, which I also like. Depends. I really enjoy it. It's some part of the job where well, I've always been interested in education sciences. So for me, the learning process in itself, it's a science in itself, and I just get to try and experiment new things every time, every year. And that's really cool. And it's also like it helps the professor. Sometimes I don't know how others feel about that, but it kind of anchors you to the reality. At some point, you're like teaching things like when I teach sometimes climate change and climate change adaptation, I always get like some of these like simple and naive looking questions, but they're super difficult to answer from students, right? These
Mhm.
questions that are like, oh, okay, yeah, I never thought that way. And so they kind of inspire me. I really like that. Also, there's something where, as I was saying before, sometimes the pure academic knowledge in itself, it takes a little bit of a time to get it the right and ready implementation. There is where you see that when people are learning things like that, it's where you see that your job is also very valuable. So yeah, um, I don't know. I find it super cool. It's really hard to juggle with all the duties that you have as a professor, at least as assistant professor. But I think it's totally worth it, for me.
What's the thing that you find the most challenging or you like the least about teaching?
I don't know. It's hard to answer. I think sometimes what I really dislike is that when you teach, you are part of a bigger structure that you need to organize all the schedules with a lot of other people, and sometimes things don't make sense in terms of pedagogy. Why do we do this first? And it's basically a matter of bureaucracy. So that's the part that I don't like. Also, I think that I get a little bit frustrated sometimes with certification and evaluation in terms of like how I like to assess people. It's it's different, so the grading part sometimes it's a little bit frustrating, and then you realize all the issues that come with it. I mean, there's a whole science on how to grade and how you want to do it, and sometimes you like to do it better, but there's no time for it, or there's bureaucratic or time or scheduling constraints, and you can do it the way you want it, but you have to live with that.
You have like so much experience across several research and education systems, and the French academic system is more focused on elite engineering schools, and you're actually working at one of these elite engineering schools. What do you think are the advantages and disadvantages of such a system?
That's a really difficult question because well, okay, advantages, what I see as an advantage, it's like I think a little bit obvious, like you can go really far in the content, let's say, of some things, because some of these things and these people have been highly trained, and they're like super good students in the sense of they're fast learners, and they're quick, and they give, fast responses, and because they have been highly trained, let's say you could go further with some things. Just give you an example, like, I could be, just a lab on how species are going to change their distribution, and then you prepare some exercise. Typically here in a lot of places, you need to explain like how to code, and and all these like our basics, whereas here this is given, so
The
you don't.
students already come with this knowledge.
And those who don't, they learn it in 48 hours because they've been coding in another language, just to give you an example, right? Or
Mhm.
things, that's the general picture, not everyone, but also, they're like genuinely interested, they like studying a lot, so that's like the good part. The bad part, I think, in general, is that the range of perspectives that you can find when you have a diverse classroom is diminished, and the range of experiences, also the different kind of ways of learning of different people, it's a little bit like they've been so much trained into learning one way that sometimes, I mean, it's really comfortable for the teacher, right? In a way, but because you less diversity, sometimes, you need to address different kinds of types of intelligence and different types of, but yeah. But I think there's a lot of other things that we are missing, when you just don't have this kind of diversity.
So
Also
you
I
find
have,
that your students have similar backgrounds, very
yeah,
similar backgrounds.
compared to other institutions where I found, at least that's my experience, it's really hard to generalize on a sample size of one, which is me. But compared to, I'd say, yeah, compared to that, yeah, I just, you miss this kind of diversity in class sometimes, in terms of like the learning process, not to mention, ethnicity or other kind of diversities. Yeah.
You've also worked quite a bit in United States, right? For how long have you worked in the US?
So I did 3 months during my PhD, and then I was there for 4 years, something like that, 4 or 5 years. Yeah.
So what did you find the most surprising about working and living in the United States?
Well, the most surprising thing what I really liked, there's a lot of things that I liked, as a at least as a European. It's the sense of possibility. It it's a little bit naive because we underneath we know that not everything is possible, but at some point everyone makes you believe, and everyone around you is kind of a dreamer, where they say you have an idea, and everyone's job is almost to push you to get to that idea and that dream of yours. Whereas I found that in Europe, sometimes the ideas are like very close examined, and sometimes in a negative way. And I don't think people mean wrong. It's not they mean bad here. It's just that they are trying to analyze it so to make it better, but in the negative thing, in a negative way. Whereas there, it's just this sense of possibility that you could do anything you wanted. If it's a good idea, it will work. So just and everyone's work is to make that happen. And it's that's the thing that I miss the most. And also the other thing where, at least I felt like, they don't really care about a lot of about nationalities and things like that. It's really like an open system where it it's very open, and in that regard, makes you feel at home right away somehow.
And you find that that's less the case in Europe.
In Europe, yeah, I mean, cultures are very strong, in Europe, and heritage is very important. So there's things that wouldn't happen here. I was at the time, for instance, just to give you an example, at Arizona State University, there was a new president coming in, and he just remodeled all the structure of departments and mixed anthropologists with evolutionary ecologists, and he did like, we need a new thing. This would be almost, it was impossible to think about that, at least in the places where I've worked in Europe, right? Because there's departments with their weight, there's a weight of heritage and bureaucracy and people, and just less flexible. Everything is more structured here, whereas there, it's everything is more flexible, I'd say.
And what did you find the most challenging or the most difficult about living in the United States and working there?
um I didn't find anything particularly difficult, to be honest. I just, yeah, I mean, I think some people might, you know, I've heard some people that struggle with the idea of, like, the your dedication to your work life is really high compared to Europe. And maybe, when you want to have like a more like a, let's say, structured family in the European sense of family, maybe, or like the Southern European, that might be difficult. And there's not a lot of like social benefits. It's more about like the work-life balance there that people struggle, and also the idea that you're basically on your own, so there's no safety net, so for good and bad, so there's people who deal really well with that, and there's others who don't. So, but I didn't find anything of the system particularly difficult there. Also, I was a postdoc, so it's a very different, I mean, probably if you talk to professors in the US, might tell you different stories. So,
In what way do you think it would be different as a professor? Do you
so
think
as
they
a
have a
yeah, so for me, as a postdoc, basically, I was really lucky to work with people that I really liked. All my supervisors have been really cool, and my collaborators, and basically, they were helping me a lot, and I never struggled with anything about bureaucracy. I never struggled about like or money or anything like that. So my job was to do research nonstop, and their job was to create the best conditions possible. But I was not attending faculty meetings. I was not attending, all these other things that come with a job, once you get to the professorship. So you grow up in a different way. I don't know how it be now.
there's never really been as much discussion as now about diversity and inclusion. And it really looks like, especially in the United States, that's a more advanced discussion than in Europe. Is that how you feel? Do you think the discussion related to that there is more advanced than here?
Yeah, I think yeah, those this discussion is yeah, more, yeah, it's more present in academia certainly than in here, for a lot of historical reasons, of course, and also like historical reasons, and also systemic issues of the United States, that you can't obviate the fact that it's a lot of like racism, and is in place, so like in Europe. But I'd say that in Europe, it's like for everything, it's kind of a milder version sometimes. But yeah, I think in the United States, they have those things more sorted out, whereas in here, our traditions have not been really, I mean, they have hampered, the way we talk about this openly, but it's quickly changing. So basically, just to give you an example, because I'm talking like really but I think that in Europe, the tradition is like, just the assumption is that we're all equal, we all have the same rights on paper, and and because of that, we don't want to think about who you are and everything, because we are all the same. That's why, for instance, when I recruit, it's really hard for me to recruit based on gender, or recruit based on other kind of minorities. I can't the law does not allow me to add that, because what they say is that you can't advertise on that, because then you're creating discrimination, even if it's positive. So you have to be aware where you are. You can do it anyways, and things are quickly changing. But I think that Europe still need to learn that basically it's not that we're all equal, it's that we're all different, and that's what's beautiful about it. And so that's our job, is to create like this heterogeneity, right? Like we talk about work at with biodiversity, it's basically the same. you know uh you want just to create as many backgrounds, people coming from different backgrounds, different experiences, so that, and also boost, that there's people who have been, not, yeah, not banned from academia, but really hampered, through systemic and structural issues, and we need to break those barriers.
So you cannot add to your job descriptions, for example, that you encourage people from, I don't know, different cultural backgrounds to
Yeah,
apply,
well,
or women, or different
I can't.
sexual orientations?
Yeah, yeah. So basically, I do add that line where,
Mhm.
I encourage people, minorities in science, especially in engineering and forestry and forest sciences. I encourage them to apply. Um, but I think that sometimes for the official positions, when you get like civil servants and things like that, this cannot be part of the
Mhm.
advertisement.
So as a gay man in academia, but also as a teacher of young people starting their education in university and so on, do you think there's like particular measures that we can take to make everyone feel more welcome, to attract people, considering this limitation in terms of employment and
Well, I'm not an expert there, but there's certainly a lot of things that we could do in our teaching practices, and also as well as in our daily life. As you said, as a gay man, I may have s- I it's not I'm not someone who I could say that I struggled with that, but certainly I've seen like a change. Sometimes a lot of people did not wanted to talk about that, or like they feel like they don't want to talk about, it's almost like talking about sex with your colleagues, right? And it's just like, no. Some people feel really uncomfortable, where I'm like, just, you know, some comments are not appropriate, some comments are not really cool, and I think that just the fact of being there helps a lot. I mean, it helped a lot some of my colleagues to just shift, or realize that, oh, okay, so that's not really cool. So unless you don't have like one-on-one experience, everything on paper is just very theoretical. Now, things we could do, basically, things that I've implemented, I just take so the class list, the student lists. I kind of just go, for instance, something like that, going only using last names, and make them tell you their first name. So you're
mhm,
not you make sure that you're not calling someone something they don't want to be called. So so basically their names, they tell me their names and their pronouns. This is something that I do because we don't have the system, to put their own, pronouns. This is something that helps quite a lot, and a lot of students told me. Also, I'm being open about like who you are, and it's not about, some people take it about like, oh, I don't discuss private life with students, and it's just well, I don't discuss my private life either. I acknowledge, who I am, and what my pronouns are, and where I was born, and where I was, raised, and just as part of like the context, and that's especially important for some of those project-based learning experiences, because sometimes I'm with them in the field for 20 days. So, you have to develop a little bit like this confidence. And also, I guess, also for me, data is really important. I think that we need to track, because otherwise these diversity efforts were just, they're in vain if you cannot have proof of evidence, right? So and this is something I'm struggling with, like here, like trying to just just look at the numbers, just write down and see. So yeah, I think that just being open about who we are, encouraging like recruit people from different ethnicities, gender identities, and all other kind of minorities. I think that also in Europe, it's something that probably maybe in the US we don't talk so much about it, but also cultural minorities. Cultural minorities are important. Uh,
What do you mean by cultural minorities?
so there's groups that have been minoritized sometimes, as in Europe there's a lot of like, you know what I'm talking is just like people coming from cultural backgrounds, like you could say France, right? Let's say France, and you're getting like a French person, and we call it French. But within France, and we know Europeans quite well, there's quite a huge difference. And sometimes, for instance, the fact that you have an accent is perceived as like you're someone from the field, or you're not very cultured.
Right.
Or sometimes, you're like the way you express yourself, it's different, and these kind of biases should be somehow erased by recruiting people from different cultural backgrounds. Well, cultural backgrounds and cultural origins. There's I'm Catalan. I'm also like from a language minority in Spain. I think it's just a matter of acknowledging that diversity in a different level also,
Do you have a Catalan accent in Spanish?
Yeah. At
Do
least
you
at least my at least my at least my partner he thinks so. So I guess so.
do you think that your Catalan accent affects the way you're treated in Spain?
Depends who. I don't think in academia. I don't think in academia. At least in my experience, it did not happen. But as a regular citizen, it has.
Have you experienced in the last years any kind of direct discrimination? Do you think that's still a problem in academia? Or is more about openly talking about how do we do diversity and inclusion?
I myself have not, also maybe because of Corona, I was at home, so but I have not really experienced like direct discrimination about that. Um, Sometimes, yeah, not really in academia. Sometimes I wonder, how, especially if I don't do a lot of social sciences, but sometimes, but I work with some people in the field, and I always get the assumption that I'm a heterosexual person and I have to use different ways, and I perceive a change in some people. I perceive that like the automatic reaction is, well, I don't care, I don't care. It's like, you don't have to justify yourself, it's okay, but I know that somehow it changes their view. They were, sometimes you had like they thought they were getting like a white male forester scientist coming and see that, and all of a sudden that's what they get, right? And it's just like, oh, wow. But then this is like the first moment, so I don't take that defensive. I've been through that, so I don't take it in a defensive way. I think it's just I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and it's just they're surprised because of a matter of statistics. They don't get a lot of those maybe, and just and then after that, I just engage a conversation. It's more about the difficult thing, and I've heard also some women talking about that. I don't know if that's your case, but that sometimes I feel like under some circumstances you need to kind of do more than the rest, because you need to prove yourself to the rest. So typically, right, yeah, you need to walk faster, you need to endure more, you need to climb the tree higher, you need to be able to show that you can core trees as good or more than the rest, because to show them that, and sometimes that's a little bit tiring. I'm more relaxed that way right now. but definitely that's something.
Just one last topic. You mentioned briefly work-life balance related to academic work in the US. Is that something you're actively pursuing right now? What do you do to kind of relax from work or kind of just
Yeah,
take a
that's a
break
good
from work?
question. That's a good question. I'm actually well, I do a lot of, I mean, basically I do a lot of sports like running. I like basically running and just get as much go dancing with some friends. Try to have my little, I mean, something that I'm trying right now is just to have a little pause from when, just to have some kind of rite of passage from work to non-work stuff, kind of sometimes like 10 minutes meditation or things like that, just to allow my brain to, detach from all my thoughts that come through the day. And it's really hard, I have to say, because I think our level of, engagement with our brain is so hard that it's just like you can't just stop it and say, stop. It's not like stop running and you stop running. It's something that it just on the back of the brain, your computer's working. So anyways, so yeah, that's what I do. Basically a little bit of sports, seeing friends, just family and running.
Thanks so much, Pep. This was a wonderful
Thank you.
conversation, and
Thank you,
thank you so
Silvia.
much for joining.
Thank you.